All right, this video is going to be about paint, but not so much talking about brands. I will talk about brands, but it's really in response to a question that I got from a patron, but it reflects kind of a question that I get quite often in some form, whether it's from patrons or from YouTube or something like that. So I thought what I'd do is I would just create a video for patrons to talk about paints to answer this specific question. But in doing that, you know me, I'll be able to ramble, and hopefully it will answer some questions that you might have, or some things that you've wondered about water-based acrylic paints. Now, the question, and I'm doing a slight bit of rewording here, but it says, do you have a video explaining all the different paints? Base colors, shades, contrast, speed paint, washes, panel oils, and on and on and on. Can you describe each type and how to use them? Because it can be really intimidating. And I totally get that, because as I'll, if I remember, as I'll talk about, there are some paints that I get from time to time that I'm like, how the heck are you supposed to use these? Beyond the obvious, you put some on your palette and paint it on. So I wanted to talk, like I said, more about acrylic paints in general and types, and less about the brands, but I'm not going to avoid brand talk. So, you know me, I say the same thing 5 times over and over, so I apologize. Now, the first thing to note about all of these paints here is that they're all water-based. This is water-based acrylic paints. I did not include, for example, say Tamiya paints, because while they are called Tamiya acrylics from time to time, they're not acrylics in the sense that modelers generally refer to acrylics. In a technical sense, lacquer paints are acrylics. They're lacquer acrylics. Acrylics, what makes acrylics and enamels differ? And this is where I wish I could still ask Andy Butcher, because he understood this much better, far better than I do. What makes enamels and acrylics different is the way that the paint adheres to the surface. I don't understand the chemical bonding behind it, but that's as my understanding of the major difference. Then when you have different acrylics differ in what medium they use to thin them. So there's some acrylics that are water-based, acrylics that are lacquer-based. Apparently you can even have acrylics that are enamel-based. Don't ask me to explain that. I have no idea. I'm just an old model guy. But all of these that we're going to look at are water-based acrylics. Now, why is that distinction important? Because it's important to understand that despite the multiple brands that are sitting here, the multiple types, the multiple colors, I've got things here that are technical paints. There's paints, there's metallic paints, there's I've got inks, but they're kind of the exception, but we'll talk about those. There's shades, there's washes, there's bases, there's layers, there's contrast. All of that is represented here, but all of them are water-based. And when it comes to water-based acrylic paints, there's not too narrow, but there's a fairly narrow band of mixes that will successfully work within that. In other words, all of them have some form of medium. They got some water in them. They have some kind of binder in them, and they have some kind of pigment or ink to give them color. Now, there can be other things in it. If you watch that video that I recommended from the painting phase, there are things in here to help depending on the paint, that help them flow better, that help them adhere better, that make them matte or make them gloss. There are things, this was something I didn't know from watching that video, there are things in here to keep them from going bad, that kill bacteria. As he was pointing out in that video, he said they're non-toxic, but I wouldn't drink them. So there are a lot of different chemicals in each one that make up the composition. So there is some difference, but at the same time, it's like talking about fast food cheeseburgers. They're all very different, but to count as a cheeseburger, there's got to be some basic ingredients, right? They're going to have a bun, they're going to have some cheese, they're going to have some kind of meat on them, maybe non-meat, but it looks like meat. So these are all different cheeseburgers, but they're still cheeseburgers. Now let's start at the most basic level, paint. Paint is paint. Paint is what you want to paint on your models. What makes the paint different? So let's look at the approaches that some of them take. Now, I don't have a good representation of all brands. I tend to use Vallejo, Citadel. I've got loads and loads of Citadel, loads and loads of Vallejo. I've got the two thin coats, the first part of their range. The second part's going to be coming out in August. I have some scale color, some AK Interactive 3rd generation, very little bit of ammo of MIG, mostly all metallics, but I'm going to put them out here to represent the brand. There are others. There is Army Painter. I will sometime in this video briefly diverge on Army Painter, just to give my opinion, but not that it matters. But each company has different solutions for how you paint. Now, for example, and that solution determines the characteristics of the paint. And what does it amount to a hill of beans? Well, you're going to find out. I'm going to end up in the end telling you it doesn't matter. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. You'll see. Hang around. Trust me. Trust me. Like Vallejo's approach is to do ranges based on audience, not just genre type, but the audience that's going to use a particular type of paint for a wide range of things. For example, Game Color paint and the new reformulation of it and the new relabeling of it is in some ways it's a competitor to Citadel and thus Warhammer, but it's really not. It's more for people who paint anything for tabletop games, because as part of their formula, they do things that are supposed to, and this is what their marketing says, that are supposed to help with, say, with game pieces, with making the paint adhere better to the piece, so that when you're handling it, it doesn't rub off. It's supposed to have, they design them to have a set of colors that appeal to gamers. They give them names that, if this were just Vallejo's, Vallejo has another color that I think it's just called dark red or something like that, but in Game Color it's gory red. This very dark red is nocturnal red. So they give everything these distinctive names. Now, part of that is for trademarking, so they can trademark it better. Citadel really goes down that road, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It just is. But Vallejo really approaches it from kind of the modeler standpoint, like the model airline. It's really not entirely, but it was, my understanding is it was created in response to aircraft modelers who wanted airbrush ready paints. Aircraft and armor modelers wanted airbrush ready paints that could go right from the bottle. If you airbrush these, you still need to add a little thinner. But they changed the formula of the paint in response to that. This is a slightly different formula in response to game painters. Here's a paint, the Game Air line, that is similar to this, but it has the properties for gamers, the durability, but it's still thin enough to do with the airbrush and all that kind of thing. The Mecha Color range, for example, it's designed as, and again, this is my understanding, and I may be wrong, but my understanding is this is designed to market to mecha builders, mostly Gunpla. That's the main target. But why it's different really is if you examine the color range here, it's very, very similar to the Mr. Hobby color range, the Gunza Sangyo Gunza paints, the color choices they have, because those are heavily used in building Gunpla. So Vallejo basically, copied is such an ugly word, but they basically, this gives you acrylic choices that very closely mirror what you will find in the Gunza range of lacquer paints. So if you like those colors but you don't want to use lacquers, well, now you've got an alternative. And I believe there's a Mecha Air line. And then of course there's the Vallejo model color. This is their, their main brand. It's just, okay, we make these for models. There's no specification. They just are what they are. And then, so that's how Vallejo approaches it. The two thin coats range, Duncan Rhodes approached this, as I understand it, more from wanting to simplify the way Citadel does things, and to kind of appeal to what he thought was the ideal profile for modelers painting minis. And so let me contrast these two, and we'll talk about contrast later. But Citadel, as I knew this before, in that video that I was referring to earlier confirmed it. Citadel does their paints in basically their main paints in two types. You have your base paints and you have your layer paints. Now, the difference in the two is essentially how pigment rich they are. This one is going to be more opaque than this one. Not that this one is transparent so much, translucent so much, but this one is going to generally have better coverage than this one. Not always. And as he admitted in that video, a lot of it was a way to sell paints. They'll tell you if you're going to paint something this one way, you have to base it in this paint, and then that gives you your base for something, and then you layer it with this, and you're like, why do I paint it twice? Well, it sells more paint. And again, I'm not saying that's good or bad. It just is. Duncan Rhodes approached it using a similar, because Citadel has a triad system based on their heavy metal style of painting for their box art. Like if you're painting ultramarines, you're gonna put down Macragge blue, and then you're gonna put down, what is the next one? Calgar blue as a highlight, and then there's gonna be another blue. I don't remember it offhand, but it tends to come in threes. You're gonna do black, and then a dark gray, and then a medium gray, and to do those panel linings and shadings and and all of that to kind of get that box art. Duncan Rhodes took the same approach with two thin coats, but what he does is, and I'll use this. This is Vampire Fang, Skeleton Legion, and Dragon Fang, and you can see the colors are not substantially different. But what's important is on the back, they have these little letters, SMH, shade, mid, highlight. And the way you know that these relate together is you look at their little number, and they're in numerical sequence for their ID numbers. So this lets you know that this series is designed to work together, and this one is, one that's going to be your shadow color. This is going to be essentially your midtone, your base, and this is going to be your highlight, if you're going to be using that type of painting system. And I'll talk about that in a second. Then you've got paints like Scale Color. They are another provider of water-based acrylics. The difference is they use a type of gel for their medium rather than water. In practical use, you use them the same way. You thin them with water, you paint them on. They feel a little different in the way they work. It's hard to describe. You can actually see the medium there, so this one would need a good shake. Don't get too hung up. People, there's videos that go, "Oh, it's gel-based, it's gel-based. You're going to have to get used to working with gel-based." Look, if you try these, they're good paints. They dry very matte. They got a nice range of colors. I just didn't buy them because they're just harder to get for me. I bought a few of them to try them out. Don't get hung up on gel. If you're watching the video and the creator says, "Oh, they're gel-based, they're gel-based," they're paints. They're acrylic paints. Play with them a little bit. After you've used them for a couple of minutes, you'll go, "Okay, they feel a little different." I see the difference now between gel and water, and I thin them down and I paint them on, and you figured it out. It's not rocket science. All of this stuff you can figure out by just using it, just testing it, just being logical about it. AK Interactive, their paint range, they have a reformulated 3rd generation range, which you can tell by the lid. That's, if you're looking at older AK, it's not going to have that lid. The newer stuff is going to have that. It's very similar to Vallejo. I think it's closest generally to model color or game color. They tend to be more matte. They work really well. The way I view these in terms of purchase is, if I need a paint color and this is available easily, I get that. If this is available easily, I get that. If both are available, I tend to go with Vallejo. Not that it's substantially better or worse. It's not that this one is worse and this one is better. This is the one that I know. And I just like Vallejo. But this almost is same. Metallic blue, this is a metallic from Ammo of MIG. I just put this out here to show that Ammo of MIG has acrylic paints. They're more like Vallejo's Model Air in that they're designed for airbrush use. You can use them for brush use. I don't like these paints. For airbrush use, they designed them in a way that you have to build them up in very, very thin layers, many multiple coats. For the children, with the Spanish water. That's inside joke. But they're not bad paints. I've used them on several models. I got rid of them. They work. They're too difficult to use, in my opinion. They're designed to have some particular properties of easy sprayability, durability, very accurate color, and all of that is true. But with this, you put it in your color cup, throw in some thinner, and you airbrush it on. With this, you've got to put it in your color cup. You've got to airbrush it on in a specific way, very thin coat, let it dry, put another coat on, let it dry, put another coat on, let it dry, build it up slowly, and Lord help you if you try to put colors over other colors. I just don't like them. But all of these have different basic driving factors behind the way they're done. But the thing to understand when you're talking about paint, regardless of brand, regardless of purpose and all that, is really, when it comes down to it, in a sense, they're all the same. Now, You're like, well, then why do they have them? Why do they have them? Because why do they have a Big Mac versus a Quarter Pounder? They're both cheeseburgers, right? There's different tastes. If Vallejo had every bottle of paint, if they had a range of 1,000 colors that all said model color, and they were all just color names, mahogany brown, and they had thinner of different types that you could use to thin it. They do. They have different mediums. They have different thinners. People would say, oh, but I'm a gamer. I need paints made for games. I need paints made for mecha. Oh, I'm an airbrush guy. Now, not to say that if you take their airbrush thinner and put it in here that it's the same as this model air. There's still some differences, but you're talking, a lot of the differences are marketing. From a practical standpoint, my recommendation when it comes to acrylic paints, look for what can you get easily. That's the first criteria. What can you get easily? If you're ordering online, and say you're ordering from Miniature Market has pretty much all of these paints except for, I think, the two thin coats. If that's where you order, then don't be so concerned with the brand. Yes, there are some differences. Yes, there are ones that I prefer over others. But when it comes down to it, first criteria in my mind is what's the easiest to get? Second, what's the color? What color do you want? If you're looking for a purple and the Game Air color is the color you really want, get that one. It's going to be thinner. It's going to be a little harder to work with in a brush sense, in that you're going to have to put on more coats. But at the same time, if you got, say you wanted this color and you got it in game color, which is thicker, you're still going to have to thin it down to brush it on smoothly. So don't think that, well, because it's an airbrush paint, I have to use it through the airbrush. No, you can paint it on. Test it. I tend to not use airbrush paints much because I find that they're thinned too much for my preference. But I know some folks who just they will only use Game Air, and they only use it for brush painting because it is pre-thin. They don't have to think about it. They feel, and I don't disagree with them because this is their opinion and how it works for them, because everything can work different for people when it comes to paint. It's not accounting rules. That has a set of standards. Paint it works different. Different people have different preferences. So look at availability and then color, and then start experimenting with paints and seeing which ones do you like, which ones do you not like. Because you will find that you prefer one over the other. I really like these two thin coats paints. They work, if I'm really getting pedantic about it, they work somewhere between Vallejo and Citadel. I think Citadel is one of the best paints you can get. I love Citadel paints. I understand they're expensive. These are priced somewhere between Vallejo and Citadel. And they're very good paints, and they have a small but very useful range. Vallejo has, I think they have like 700 colors. But as you use them, then you'll figure out what paint you like best, what brand you like best. And then you can know, okay, and it doesn't mean that I never go outside of it, but generally now, if I need a bottle of paint, if I don't need a Canon-specific paint, meaning I'm not doing something that in Warhammer that I'm thinking, okay, in order to sell this on eBay, I need to stick to a fairly well-known color scheme for this particular faction, so I'm just going to go with Citadel paints. That's my criteria, and I know I like Citadel paints. But if it's just generic, I need a dark red, I'm more and more I'm just going with game color. Now I've got tons of paints. I don't need to buy anything for probably the next 6 years. But these tend to be not so much out of fandom for Vallejo, but simply because they have such a wide range and they're so readily available, and their price is right. It's a very low price compared to many others, and very good value. But all of these, thin it with medium, acrylic medium, Lamian medium from Citadel, which is really just acrylic medium, glazing mediums. You can just use water. All of those work. When I watch many YouTube painters, especially a lot of them that were on the heavy metal team, but not exclusively, or watch Richard Gray, so much of what they do is just thinning everything with water. You'll learn after a while how much you can get away with certain paints with thinning with water versus adding in some kind of medium. But the paints themselves are all, think of them as all cheeseburgers. And you're just talking Wendy's, McDonald's, I'm not going to compare them to Burger King. That wouldn't be fair. Five Guys, something like that. I'm not a real big fan of Burger King. I used to be, but I don't know. Their service is really slow. Anyway, these are good. Sarastro uses a lot of scale color paints. He really likes those. I see a lot of guys using AK. So think in terms of availability in color, and then start looking at characteristics. Now, you may decide that you really just prefer the characteristics of Vallejo Game Color over anything else. Go with that. But know that every now and then you might not find the precise color you want in the Game Color range. You may find it in Two Thin Coats or in Citadel or in the Model Air range or something like that, or maybe Scale Color. Pick those up. The key, I think, to really enjoying the hobby, and this is where it all boils down to, the key to enjoying the hobby is working with a variety of them to get some experience so that you can be confident that if somebody puts any paint in your hand, you can make it work. You may not like it as much as another one, but you're going to be able to make it work. I remember one time, and I talked about Army Painter. I'll mention them. I'll go on a sidebar about Army Painter. I don't like Army Painter products. Now, I have nothing against the company. It is one of the most engaged companies in the hobby you'll ever find. Every interview with everybody I've ever seen from Army Painter seems like they would be great people to sit down and have a cup of coffee with and talk about maybe a cheeseburger and have a cup of coffee with and talk about the hobby. So I'm not making a personal judgment on them, but every product I've ever used, every single one, there is an asterisk. There's okay, but you got to know this, you got to know that. If you get their paints, you've got to know that they come with extra medium packed in the top, and you have to pour out that medium, and then you have to shake it up really crazy well. You can't just shake it up really. You've got to put a shaker, a little ball in it, and you got to shake it around, and you got to stick something in there and stir it. If you just get their paints and you don't know the formula that they use for everything, and you just get the paints and you give it a quick shake and you turn it over and pour it out, you're going to get gloop. And you're going to go, what the heck is this? And you're going to be frustrated. And the problem is, with every Army Painter product, they have to make some video explaining why you're using it wrong. And to me, that's a problem. You use Vallejo, they say shake it up and use it. That's pretty much it. Citadel, give it a good shake, use it. Two Thin Coats, give it a good shake, use it. I've been disappointed with every Army Painter product. Not enough pigmentation. They have good color matching and they have all of these things, but to me, they always seem to be playing catch up. Again, to just continue on the sidebar for just another minute, you remember they had their Army Painter speed paints that came out, and I did a video talking about them, and there was a big thing about how, okay, even days, and I tested this over and over, even before I did the video, for sometimes days after the paint had been applied, you could take a wet Q-tip and just rub it off. Now, what really just kind of slammed the door for me on Army Painter was when they did that They never mentioned that as a feature. They never mentioned that it was there. They never said anything about it. They had to have known. When a couple of painters pointed it out, and if you go watch the videos, one I can't remember, the guy who always wears a mask, I can't remember his name, and the other was Juan Hidalgo. They pointed it out, and they pointed it out in a very kind way. I mean, they weren't acting like they were being ripped off or something like that. And people just obliterated them. Why are you making this the main point? It was nonsense, because it was an actual thing. And creators that I had previously respected were saying, "Oh, this isn't an issue. It's a feature." It's all of a sudden, all of this stuff started coming along. And I'm like, no, you put it on just as they prescribe to do. You set it down, you let it dry, and the next day you come in and you take a Q-tip and you lick that Q-tip, wipe it on the paint, and it brings it up. That's not a feature. That's a failure. And it was interesting in watching that painting phase video that I've referenced several times, that the fellow that was in there, he said, you noticed we came out with this paint. Army Painter came out with their version of it, and then they had to reformulate it. And he said it's because they didn't spend the time and the research and the development to do it right the first time. And in my mind, if Army Painter was really sold on, no, this is a feature, they would have never come out with the Speed Paint 2.0. They never would have. So, and I don't mean to be controversial. If you use speed paints and you like them, keep using them. I'm not saying don't, but there have been enough times with their paints, with the speed paints, with the quality of what are their brushes. If all I had to use, if for some reason every other company went away and all I had to use was Army Painter, I could make it work. I could. I don't have any doubt about that. The paints haven't defeated me. But I just keep coming back to, there are some brands that are better than others, and some that, yeah, when I say availability and all of that, in my mind, I don't care if Army Painter is the most available for me. I'm going to find another source. I'm going to find another supply. They've disappointed me too many times. It's the same way with Ammo MIG. I've pretty much given up using any of their acrylic products. They've got a few, like this Warhead Metallic Blue, that it's a very good color. It has some great properties. I haven't found anything that equals this. But in their entire range, I found one color that I go, okay, I really like that one. So I've got a couple of bottles of this sitting by. I'll probably never finish one. But, you'll learn. And if you like Army Painter and you hate Vallejo, fine. As long as you are comfortable using it and you are happy using it. These right here, if all I ever had was, say, Game Color or Model Color or Citadel or two thin coats, I can make it work. I'm glad that I have a lot of choice. I don't tend to use a lot of Model Air. I've already talked about that. I don't tend to use a lot of Game Air. I don't tend to use a lot of Mecha Color. But the more you use it, the more you'll get comfortable with the fact that you can make any of it work. And I know I'm flogging the horse there, but it frustrates me sometimes that paint companies give you all of this choice, but they don't do a good job of, and I understand why. They don't do a good job of saying, okay, really, you're not talking a wide range of difference here. You're essentially talking slight differences in medium, slight differences in pigmentation, and slight differences in thinning in the bottle. That's what you're talking about. So availability and color, I would recommend, let those be your driving factors. Then experiment with different brands to see what you like. If you're like me and you're on a budget and you want to go, okay, what works? Vallejo or Citadel. You can't go wrong with either one of these. Yeah, there's colors in the ranges that could be better in one or the other. Citadel whites aren't the greatest. So you may experiment around with some colors, but for the most part, people complain about Citadel white. I've used it. I make it work. I don't know what I do different. I'm like, I thin it, I put it on, I'm good. Focus on availability and color. Pick a couple of ranges that you like so that you have plenty of choice. Don't forget you can mix colors. I tend to not mix colors because I just don't have time. If I'm working on a model, it may be spread over a month. I don't need to remember how many drops of this and how many brushfuls of that did I put in. I want to know I used this versus this. That's what I need to know. So I don't tend to mix colors a lot simply because it's not convenient for the way that I work. If you mix colors, theoretically, you could get some of the paints that are single pigment red, yellow, blue. You could get white, you could get black, and you could get brown, and you literally have everything you need to make every color if they're single pigment paints. It's another thing to talk about. I'm meant to talk about that. And I know I'm already going to warn you, this video is long. There's just too much to talk about. Each paint bottle has differing pigments in it. Some of them are a mix of pigments, and you'd be surprised at some of the pigments that are in it. There are times that I can put some water in, like Vallejo Sky Gray, and you'll see that it starts to separate, and there's kind of an orangish color to it that comes out. This is not necessarily just purple pigment. It may be multiple types of pigments, and very rarely do paint manufacturers put their pigments on it. I think, does Scale Color do it? No, I don't even see it here. There are some paints, a few brands, that will put, okay, here's what our colors are. Here's what the pigments are. But most of these are multi-pigment paints. There are a few brands that you can get, and the names aren't coming to me, but Google single pigment acrylic paint, and you can find it. If it's a single pigment, meaning it's pure red, pure yellow, pure blue, pure green, whatever, you can mix those and not get weird results. But don't be surprised if you mix, red and yellow, say from Vallejo, you're not going to necessarily get orange. You would think you would, but you don't necessarily get orange because they're not using single pigment paints. There are other pigments in there to get the particular properties they want for that color. So you're actually mixing anywhere from 4 to 7 or more pigments in that mix. So just that's another thing to keep in mind with when you're dealing with paints. So that's honestly, not that I say never recommend. It's not that I never recommend mixing paints. There's plenty of times you can mix paints. I mix paints all the time, but I tend to lean towards, let me find the color, or let me go, you know what, I'm going to accept this color. You see Sarastro, a lot of times he'll take 3 colors and come up with like 7 intermediate mixes for doing all of his shading and all that, because he's an incredible painter. I'm like, look, give me these 3. That's what I want. That's how I do things. I may use glazing to change the opacity, which visually changes what the color looks like, but I'm just going with those 3 right out of the bottle. So that's something else to keep in mind, is the variety of paints, the colors, the pigments. Again, making use of them is going to be critical in how you are able to apply these paints. Now, another type of paint that you can run into is, sometimes it's called a wash, sometimes it's called a shade. There's a variety of names. Shade tends to be the name that Citadel uses for them. Wash is what everybody else uses. It's the acrylic equivalent of oil and enamel washes. Now, They behave differently. You don't use acrylic washes and shades like oils and enamels. You don't slop it on and then go back an hour later and clean it up. It won't work that way. You can watch some of my other videos and other videos on YouTube about actual application. Where the washes tend to differ from paints, and this is not exclusive, and they all have their slightly different methods, but what you tend to have when it comes to shades and washes is you have slightly different mediums that flow better, but they're going to be much thinner than your regular paints. And they may or may not make use of pigments or inks. Inks differ from pigments in a way that I don't quite understand. But my understanding is your pigments are powders, your inks are inks. They're different things. They have different properties. Inks are very intense color, but they're very translucent colors generally. So you don't paint with inks, but inks can be used to make things more intense, to glaze things, you can use them as washes and things like that. What you're getting essentially when you get a wash or a shade is you're generally getting an ink that's been thinned and had additional products to help it flow better, so it flows around details and things like that and doesn't leave as much staining, coffee staining, like the stain here. That's, it's not actually coffee, but it's referred to as a coffee stain. So they're a type of acrylic paint, but the reality is I could take, like this Agrax Earth shade, I could take a brown color. Let me see, do I have something brown? So, yeah, just look at this. I could take this Vallejo model color, thin it down with water, and for the most part do the same thing I could do with this. Now, it's not going to be exact. I might have to add in some flow improver or some kind of medium or something like that. But there's nothing so special about this that makes it exclusively different from this. This is more convenience when you get down to it. It sells product. Yes, the basic composition of both of these is different, but again, not substantially so. To put it in the cheeseburger world, this may be, I don't know, a chicken sandwich, but it's still got a bun and tomato and lettuce and cheese on it, and that may be too severe of a difference. There's not a whole lot of difference. So a lot of this is convenience, and color and availability. It comes down to the same stuff. What can you get? And again, I've got this. I actually keep this bottle just so I have a bottle of Army Painter stuff to show on video. You can use Army Painter Strong Tone. They have a wide range of washes. They're not bad, but again, they try to be a low-cost alternative to Citadel. These are supposed to be competitors, but quite honestly, I find that Vallejo is better than Army Painter, in my opinion. So I don't bother, again, buying Army Painter. That and the lid split. Maybe not Army Painter's fault, but it actually looks like it was cut while opening the box. Anyway, and then this is two thin coats. And there are other brands, but these are the ones I have. But these are used for shading, for putting, pen washes around bolt detail, for panel lines. You can apply it all over and give it a grimy look. There's a lot of ways to work with it. Watch videos and it'll show you how to work with it. But again, I wouldn't get too hung up on brand. If you're really looking for one recommendation, Citadel. Yes, it's more expensive, but they are super good, super quality. They've recently reformulated it. You can tell the difference between the two because the old ones are in these very tall bottles. The new ones are in these shorter bottles. As a feature, the shorter bottles cost the same. So yeah, you get less for the same money, but that's just the way it is with everything. Look at what you paid for a gallon of milk 10 years ago. That's just the cost of it. We're not necessarily loaded with money, all of us. I'm not. But we have to face it, we're in a luxury hobby. I've been to places in this world where people literally kill each other over food. This stuff, if you're able to choose between any of these, even if you have to be very careful and judicious in your purchase of them, you're living far better off than most people in this world. Enough editorializing. If you're looking for one recommendation, go with Citadel Shades. You can easy to get online. There's stores everywhere. They work really well. I like the game wash, the Vallejo stuff. They just don't have as great of a color range. Two thin coats works really well. They just don't have as big of a range. Already said what I want to say about those. Citadel Shades. But know that if you just get some medium, even some water, you can make this essentially do the same thing as this for the most part once you start experimenting and learning what to do. All right, contrast paints, speed paints, express color. Part of the problem I think with these products is Citadel chose the name Contrast to start it off. They were the ones who kind of introduced this product or made it big. I think there was actually another company that did paints like this prior to Citadel, but they never really, I don't even remember who they were. And I may be getting my timelines wrong. Citadel called these Contrast because it's a brandable name, Contrast paints. Because what they do is when you put them on, the idea behind them is you paint a model a light color. You paint a figure a white or a bone color or a light gray or something like that. You put on one coat of this fairly heavily, mop up the excess. It settles in the recesses, which provides some shading. It pulls away from the ridges, so that gives some highlighting, and then it colors the rest of it, so it gives you a base. If you watch that painting phase video, it's you sell. The idea is you sell this paint to a kid, and the kid goes home and in a few quick steps paints something and goes, hey, that looks cool. That's the whole theory behind this paint. Now, it's been used for a lot more than just its original intended purposes. People mix paint with it. People use it for glazing. People use it for shade. If you ever watch Juan Hidalgo, the way he uses shade colors, it's amazing. So they're very good paints. And I know some people that have switched like to Citadel Black Templar, which is a black color. Or there's another black shade they have, but the name is slipping me. That's what they use for their black paint. Because some of them cover better than others. I can't speak. So these kind of started it. Vallejo came out recently with their Express color, which seeks to do the same thing. Army Painter came out with their speed paints, and then their second speed paints, not because the first ones were wrong, but because we wanted the other ones to be different than the others, even though the first ones, you get it. But all they are is paints that are closer to shades and washes than they are paints. That's really what they are. They're thin. You can use them perfectly. You can use them right out of the bottle as a shade. I do that a lot. You can generally thin these with water. Citadel doesn't react as well with water in all cases as Vallejo does. And you get different performance. Some of these have really great coverage initially. Others don't. Some you put on and it's a thin wash, and others you put it on, you're like, oh man, that's just paint. So you've got to work with them to learn what to do with them. But they are valuable. They're valuable in that They give you the ability to put on, say, you can paint something, say, black, and then dry brush it with gray, and then give even a tighter dry brush with white. Put this over it, and it looks outstanding. It's real easy. I use this a lot for interiors, for cockpits, for hoses, for other things like that. At the same time, you can paint, if you watch Juan Hidalgo, you know you can paint an entire miniature, basing it entirely in contrast paints, and then just using a few other paints to do some highlights. They're really, when you get down to it, they're just another paint. Slightly different properties. You got to play with it a little bit to figure out how it works for you. You may try some of these and go, this isn't really working for me. Again, you can do most of what you do with this with just any of these acrylic paints. You just got to put in a combination of mediums to get it to do what you want. They're useful. Again, to make a recommendation, if you're going to pick one, you say, I just want a recommendation, so if I try it out, I can try it out. Try Citadel. They're the granddaddy. They've got a very, very wide color range with it, and they generally work well. If the model shop near you has a rack full of Vallejo Express color, then get those. They're not going to be that much different. I haven't tried the new Speed Painter 2.0 because, like I said, I'm done with Army Painter. To me, it was Lucy football. Come on, Charlie Brown, kick the football. Okay, I'll try it again. I'm tired of the football getting pulled away. And I know that's harsh, but, you know, you're paying me. You get transparency. So I recommend this, but like I said, if this is near you, if there were a shop near me that carried these, and I could, on my way home from work, stop in and pick these up, I would get these. However, the shop that I can get these from is quite a few miles in the other direction from my work, which means I have to go, 10 miles one way to get to the shop, and then 22 miles back home. This one, I can go by the shop that is about a mile out of the way and pick these up. I can order either one of them online. So you pick. If you like Vallejo over Citadel, if you think about Citadel like I think of Army Painter, I'm never going to use Citadel, fine. Get Vallejo Express color. Try the Army Painter stuff. You may like it. But if I have to tell one, I say go with Citadel because I know generally it's going to work. But either one of these will work really well. All right, to wrap this up, and this is going to be really skimming over it fast. One, because this video is getting long, and two, I've got to get ready to go to work. I only have a limited amount of time each morning to film, and when I'm running my mouth like this, it's kind of hard to get it all done. There are acrylic products that are specialty products. Citadel tends to call them technical paints. Vallejo's Game Color, they have special effects. Then there's things like inks like this. Try a few inks. Get a white ink, get a black ink, get a blue ink, and just try, Google for some videos on using inks. There's far better stuff than, I don't tend to use them that much except for thinning paints. If I want my white paint to be thinned, but I still want good coverage, I thin it with ink. It can be used for stuff like that. It's kind of the basis for a lot of these contrast paints. So, I mean, you can do a lot with it. I just don't tend to use it that much because I haven't found it that necessary. But you may. These technical paints, Citadel makes a wide range of them. Vallejo makes them. There are others who make them. And they do things that are technical in nature in the sense that, like this Agrellan Earth, if you put this on a model and you put it on the base of a model and you let it dry, it kind of flakes up like dried mud. That can be used for mud effects. That can be used for rust effects. This typhus corrosion, it has some grit in it. You paint this on something, it looks like a rust base. It's got a darker color. It's got some grit to it. It gives some texture to it, and it's super, super matte. So there's loads of these. Then you've got some like Vallejo Game Color, the special effects. This one is called Galvanic Corrosion. other than it being an orangish paint, I'm not sure how the heck you use this. So be aware of that when you're looking at these effects paints. My recommendation, if you're going to use an effect paint, make sure you can find a video or an article or someone who can tell you how is it to be applied. Because some of them are not obvious. This one, the first time you use it, you can go, okay, I see this has some texture in it. But you could use this for basing. If you put brown paint over this, it's going from rust to dirt. The acrylic earth, it's meant to be, crackly earth, muddy earth that's cracked up. Not because it was funny, but anyway. But you can put this on like I did on the Orkjet, and it's a great basis for rust. So there are a lot of paints like this. They're acrylic, they're water-based. You can thin them with water. You can add paint to them. You can, mix and match. They're not designed as much to be paints, although it's pretty much what I've been able to do with this one. Still got to figure that one out. But they have other properties in them that give you other things. Some of these, like I said, it's best if you find how to use them before you go buy it. I bought this one just because it was a new product, and I wanted to try little bits and pieces of this new range, and it was one of their special effects, and the word galvanic corrosion seemed interesting to me, and I got it and I put it on a model, and I'm like, this is just paint. So like I said, if you can find a video that tells you how to use it before you buy it, it's probably going to be more productive if it's not obvious. There are some products, like, let me grab this over here off camera, like this earth texture. Okay, that you can pretty much guess what that is. It's a big old honking bottle of mud. And you put that on, add some jelly, and you got a good lunch. Now, you put that on, and you've got textured earth. Sometimes it just is what it is. Others you may want to read up on. Now, I know this video has been very, very long, and I've skipped all over the place, and I've editorialized, and I've wandered, and you know me. That's just, I tend to just riff. I have some notes that I'm looking at of things I want to cover, but I don't go with scripts. I don't know why. I can sit here and talk about something and wander. I can't do scripts. But this is a lot of thoughts on acrylic paints. And I've said this several times in this video, but the bottom line is they're just paint. They're just water-based paints with slightly different characteristics. If one brand or one color or one type interests you, research it on YouTube, research it on Google, buy it, try it. If you're new to this, or one guy that contacted me said, hey, the last time I built models was in the 70s, and all I used was Model Master enamels. I can't find those anywhere. What do I use? I said, what stores do you have near you? He said, there's a Hobby Town. I said, go to Hobby Town, get Vallejo, Model Color, or Citadel paints. They're water-based. Get the colors you need. And he contacted me months later and said, great advice. Enjoying all of them. Thanks. Try a few. Find some brands that you like. If you don't like a brand, don't worry about it. I mean, I know I've ragged on Army Painter a lot, but really, if you like it, fine. If you don't, cool. It's one I prefer not to use. Same way I prefer not to use scale color, not because there's anything wrong with it. It's just too doggone hard for me to get. Even its price is good. It's just, I can drop by the shop on my way home today and pick up some of this. I can go a little bit out of my way to get this. I can go over to Hobby Lobby and get some very basic colors. So think more in terms of color and availability, and then just experiment with water, and I keep mentioning medium, like I have this Liquitex acrylic medium, and I know it comes in a big scary bottle. It's just something you can get at any art supply store. I use that. But if you're not sure about that, hold on. Go grab some of this Lamian medium from Citadel. It's essentially this, just thinned down. Now, you know, I get this for, I think this was like 13, this was like 13 bucks. This was like $7. I can get a lot more use out of this over time, but this is convenient. You see, I still have a bottle of this. It's convenient. Pick a few mediums, experiment with them. I can tell you stuff all day. You can watch videos all day. None of it's going to matter until you step out of your comfort zone and try these products. Until you do that, you're still going to be going, I don't understand them. I don't understand how to use them. There are products that I have found out years later that I was not using quite as intended, but I found a use for them and I liked the use. And I'm like, huh. So it's not that I quit using them the way I'd been using them. I just, in essence, picked up a new use for them. So if something works in a way that works for you and creates the effect that you want, it's working correctly. Because really, all weathering, all shading, all painting, all the effects we put on our models, all of it is really just applying paint. Thin paint, thick paint, chunky paint. It's all paint. So if you kind of approach it from that mindset, what paint color do I want and where can I get it? Everything else will just flow from that. And have fun while you're doing it. Always have fun while you're doing it. All right, I've yammered on long enough. If you were still watching at this point, thank you very much. I'm thankful for all patrons, but there's about 3 of you that will probably still be watching at this point. So I'm especially thankful to y'all. And so I'll just say happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.